you just love when you go into making a video thinking that it's going to be simple and straightforward, and then it instantly spirals into something much, much more complicated than anticipated? No? Just me? Little YouTuber things. I started off this video specifically researching a guy apparently known as Jamie Reynolds. First, I saw him in this photo, and I was like, what is his deal? But more importantly than the fact that I can't find hardly anything about this strange man is that he wasn't the only one doing this, but this was apparently like a whole thing. This was like Jackass before Jackass. So let's explore this. As it turns out, this story is wild. Apparently, Jamie Reynolds wasn't unique at all in his daredevil habits. From the early 1900s up until probably just about World War II, there was this huge trend of dudes who called themselves human flies, whose entire job was scaling buildings with just their hands and no equipment for pay. I don't know about you, but this seems absolutely unthinkable to me. Maybe it's because I was born without any sort of proclivity for danger, and I'm not even a huge fan of roller coasters. I'm very much risk averse. However, much like people's instinct to rubberneck at car accidents or oogle at train crashes, as I discussed in my video on the Victorian obsession with recreational train crashes, people really got a kick out of watching these dudes risk their lives to scale these random buildings. Tens of thousands of people at a time even. So of course these guys are the ancestors of modern day daredevils, from guys getting shot out of cannons or driving motorcycles over canyons, or doing crazy stunts for internet clout, or the ever-popular Jackass series. It goes back much, much further than I ever thought it would, and actually says a lot about the social history of masculinity itself, and how all of that changed in the late Victorian era when societal ideas of the gender construct were beginning to be in flux. Jamie Reynolds was not the only human fly, but rather one of many. A swarm, you could say. Come learn with me about dudes scaling buildings for cash, some of whom died gruesome deaths, and the history of great daredevil spectacles. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Wayfair. As many of you already know, I am currently hosting season 2 of the wonderful series A Style is Born, brought to you by Wayfair. Wayfair has their own channel here on YouTube where they have various shows talking about some fascinating histories of objects and design. A Style is Born is a show where we explore the history behind some of the most iconic design styles. You may already be familiar with season 1, which was hosted by fellow YouTuber Ariel Bissett, who did an amazing job and explored some incredible styles like mid-century modern, cottagecore, and boho. In this series, we peel back the layers of some of your favorite styles and see what fascinating history is hiding underneath, what influences evolved them, what their main elements are, the social factors that you may not have realized were connected to them, as well as how they're being revived throughout recent decades through to today so that you can incorporate them into your own home if you so desire. You can go ahead and check out the first couple episodes of season 2 where we explore Art Deco and Art Nouveau, two of my very favorite styles, and now episode 3 is out and we're covering brutalism, one of history's most controversial design styles full of blocky shapes, concrete, and some really intriguing origins. Come learn with me by following A Style is Born over on Wayfair's YouTube channel, which is linked in the description below. And now, let's get back to the video. Flies weren't the only men to make a career out of doing death-defying stunts, nor were they even the first. Many thrill-seeking acts came long before them, like for instance Steve Brody, the man who became famous for surviving his jump from the Brooklyn Bridge in 1886, although it's also likely that most of his jumps in his career were faked using a dummy. And then, long before Brody, there was a man named Sam Patch who, in 1827, jumped over the newly built Passaic Falls in New Jersey. Patch's jump, in that the falls were built to power the factory mills where Patch worked, was emblematic of slowly shifting ideals of masculinity. Paul E. Johnson writes in Sam Patch, the Famous Jumper, "In Patch's world, a man's art was his identity-defining skill, the whole range of combined mental and manual performances by means of which trained men provided for the wants and needs of their communities. It called up the yeoman artisan republic and ideals of manhood that it sustained, ideals that Sam Patch and other working men had reformulated and extended into the industrial world of the 19th century. Patch would go on to earn widespread fame for his jumps, leading to an incredibly famous one from Niagara Falls in 1829. But we'll get into more of these daredevils later. The point is, from the very beginning, doing these dangerous stunts was magnetic for men because it was a way to express their masculinity, whereas by Victorian standards, the same could not be said for women. A woman, of course, could partake in stunts, and many of them did, but it wasn't remotely a way for them to assert or reinforce their gender the way that it was for men. As we'll see, dominating skyscrapers with nothing but their hands, human flies were speaking to a new form of heroic masculinity where manhood was a spectacle or theater. These stunts would draw crowds of hundreds or thousands, huddling below and squinting upwards in awe and horror, knowing full well that they might watch a man die today. And if he didn't, he would earn fame and glory, likely even a career. Jacob Smith writes in The Thrill Makers, "The performers spoke to audiences about shifting conceptions of masculinity. Manhood, according to Gail Betterman, is best seen as a continual dynamic process, and that at every point in history, multiple and often contradictory ideas about manhood are available to explain what men are, how they want to behave, and what sorts of powers and authorities they claim as men." Irving Goffman argues that gender, like all social roles, is something achieved through socially and historically determined interaction, and he defines conventionalized appearances and behaviors meant to indicate a gendered self as gender displays. The Thrill Makers were specialists in action framed as gender display, and their actions reflected and refracted tensions and ambiguities in the ideologies of American manhood. And it should be noted, most of these thrill seekers weren't upper-class men. They were working class and frequently had a history with whatever thing that they were trying to conquer, or they were trying to create a career out of doing stunts, or they were trying to promote a business that they ran. More often than not, professional thrill seekers spoke to a shifting type of working class manliness that manifested not through social propriety and money empires, but instead through physical feats, using their bodies to dominate grand man-made structures. That's where human flies come into play. If there's any image in your mind of silent films, odds are it may be the famous shot of Harold Lloyd clinging to a broken clock on a tall building in Safety Last 1923. In this scene, Lloyd was cleverly referencing a phenomenon that has been almost entirely forgotten in popular memory, but from the 1900s through the 1930s was an extremely popular line of public stunt work. Human flies, also referred to as human spiders, human lizards, steeplejacks, bilderers, stegophilers, and so on. The phenomenon of human flies was so integral to the inspiration for Safety Last that the film paid one, a man named Harry Young, to climb the Martinique Hotel in New York with a Safety Last promo banner on his back. Young tragically fell from the hotel and died during the climb, a morbidly on-the-nose thing to happen considering the title of the film. But this incident isn't just notable because of the tragedy. It's a solid representation of a wide number of factors that made up the human fly craze in the first place. Its roots lie in the Regency period when ceiling walkers at circuses would use various mechanisms to simulate walking on the ceiling or on beams. And the term steeplejack comes from the actual job of the same name, men who would scale and repair or build tall structures like church steeples and chimneys. But the first written record of actual stegophily, so far as we can tell, comes in 1901 from The Roof Climber's Guide to Trinity, written by Geoffrey Winthrop Young, explaining how you can climb up the Trinity College spires as he did in 1895. The book was more satire than something to be taken seriously, even though the guy literally did do that. But jokes aside, there was a real glimmering draw for men to go climb Big Tower. As the Industrial Revolution led to the skyward growth of buildings taller than ever before, there came men who sought to conquer them the same as if they were mountains. And, of course, with the rise of marketing and advertising as mass media spread, these stunts proved to be an extremely effective way to promote something or sell a product, much like how Young was promoting Safety Last when he fell to his death. One of the most famous human flies, a man named Harry Gardner, who often claimed to be the original, but frankly, a lot of these dudes did, took advertising sponsors for nearly every climb that he did, whether it was promoting an ad office or commemorating a new building or selling beaver oil. There was typically money involved. Sometimes it was as simple as passing a hat around the crowd to collect tips while he did his climb, and for others they would make religious or political speeches before climbing. Either way, it became fairly profitable for human flies to travel the country doing climbs for pay, and some, like Jamie Reynolds, would donate to charity. Speaking of Jamie Reynolds, let's get back to him. This dude was doing the most. He didn't stop at scaling buildings like Spider-Man, oh no. He would also do tricks at the top, like balancing on several chairs over the edge, and doing handstands, or like climbing up on the flagpole and planking on it. What a legend. I couldn't find much biographical info on this guy, but apparently he started doing handstands as a toddler and was doing stunts ever since. It seems that he was simply born without fear. As he once said, "I only get inspired over 30 stories." Another totally buck-wild human fly was a man named Nutty Jack Williams, who allegedly had a grip so strong he could support his entire body weight with one finger and squeeze a raw potato into a pulp. Another reporter claimed that his fingers were more like steel claws than bone and flesh. He started his career as a trapeze artist, where he rescued a girl who was stuck in a high-rise that was on fire and too tall for the fire truck ladders, so he climbed up the side of the building with his hands and carried her down to safety. He then decided that simply was not deadly enough, and decided to go climb stuff like the Woolworth Building with, according to the New York Journal in 1918, the agility of an ape. He climbed up the Washington Monument, he climbed up the Waldorf Hotel with a bodacious babe clinging to his back like he was King Kong. He claimed to have climbed everything in the country with a smooth face. After the 20s, he disappeared from the press, apparently, but turns out he actually went and started a circus, according to his son, John Fraser. He spent the Great Depression moving from odd job to odd job and taught his children circus tricks. One human fly was also nicknamed the Unkillable Actor. Rodman Law started his climbing career by conquering the Flatiron Building in 1909 to win a bet, and went on to do a number of creative movie stunts. Advertising one of his upcoming films, the Motion Picture News magazine declared, "You've heard of Rodman Law, the man who was shot from a huge gun high into the air. The man who stood on his head on the ball which tips the flagpole of the Singer Building. The man who climbed the side of the Flatiron Building with his bare hands. The man who has defied death 100 times. Rodman Law, the calculating daredevil who has thrilled millions by his mad recklessness in performing seemingly impossible stunts." So he's a pretty good example of just how intertwined the human flies were with the movie business and advertising, and also how these dudes could get conscripted to do other non-climbing stunts. But Harry Gardner was arguably the most famous one of all. Frequently claiming to be the first human fly, Gardner got his start in 1905 and successfully climbed over 700 buildings during his career. He frequently drew tens of thousands of spectators, one time even getting a crowd of 150,000 in 1916 when he climbed the Majestic Building. He was so popular that even companies not sponsoring his climbs would use him to sell their products in newspaper ads, but tragically, in the 1920s, he mysteriously disappeared. One rumor says he was found beaten to death beneath the Eiffel Tower, but we'll never know for sure. Not all human flies were so successful. George Oakley earned some notoriety from a stunt where he was strapped into a straitjacket and freed himself while hung upside down from his feet from the Hagerstown First National Bank building, then climbed down the building, and then back up to the roof. Oakley was climbing the Chambersburg Trust building when he fell 3 stories to the ground and broke pretty much every bone in his body. Some other flies earned unique nicknames, like John Ciampa, who became known as Brooklyn Tarzan, and still others weaponized the danger of their job to incite shock and excitement from the onlookers. George Poley, who started climbing buildings when a shopkeeper told him he'd give him a free suit if he successfully climbed the store, once scaled the Woolworth Building and scared the shit out of the crowd by occasionally pretending to slip. Oh, the lovable scamp. Unfortunately, he didn't make it to the top before getting arrested, but don't ask me how the cops got him. I have no idea. I like to imagine they were climbing up after him, Looney Tunes style though. But the cops had real reason to want to stop human flies from scaling buildings. Not only did they often cause damage to the building edifices, or died, but sometimes they even took onlookers to the grave with them. One fly in 1929 tried to climb Chicago's Lyric Opera House, but slipped and fell 23 stories to his death, crashing on top of 2 young messenger boys. One of the boys sustained critical injuries and the other died. Technically speaking, the human fly trend only faded out but didn't actually disappear. This is due in part to the ever-increasingly dangerous height and build of new skyscrapers. These new tall boys are too smooth, too flat, or oddly shaped. It's simply too dangerous. That doesn't stop folks from trying, though. In 1977, George Willig climbed the World Trade Center. In 1981, Dan Goodwin, often dubbed Spider Dan, climbed the Sears Tower, and another time he scaled the John Hancock Building. French Spider-Man Elaine Roberts takes his shot at stupidly tall buildings too, like the Burj Khalifa and the Eiffel Tower. People were less impressed in 2008 when he tried climbing the New York Times building because, as one annoying cop said, it already looks like a ladder. Okay, you go climb it then. But in the end, if trends like parkour and whatever nonsense is probably going on over on TikTok when I'm not looking is proof of anything, it's that one thing is certain. No, 3 things are certain. Death, taxes, and that men will never overcome the deep hunger within their souls to go climb tall thing like monkey. I would be remiss to not mention the interwoven history of stuntmen here. Many human flies went on to become movie stuntmen, the actors conscripted to double as the headlining film star and do whatever dangerous thing that the star couldn't do, jumping off a building, or across a train, or getting knocked through a window, and worst of all, they had to keep their role secret because the Hollywood fantasy often sold the idea of these big stars like Douglas Fairbanks doing their own stunts. It was described in the Saturday Evening Post by one stuntman as an unforgivable sin for a stuntman to break the illusion by taking credit for his own work. This caused a great deal of friction between stuntmen and leading men, especially because the stuntmen were also expected to literally verbally back these lies up a lot of the time. The guy from the SCP article went on, "I'm the mystery man of the movies, the skeleton in the star's closet. Though I performed under the aliases of 30 different stars, you've never read my name as a cast credit. Socially, I'm poison, and stars resent the suggestion that they even know me. Yet, they can't get along without me. I wear their clothes, I ride their horses, I sail their boats, I fly their planes, for I am the man that they are supposed to be. I am the one individual Hollywood can't take as a joke, the one embarrassing relation they can't laugh off, that unpopular stepbrother of the stars, the double." Many of these stars would regale breathtaking stories of the death-defying risks that they took for their films, even showing photos of said stunts where it wasn't even them in the photo, but their stuntman. There's yet another gender angle to this too, in that since most stuntmen were, well, men, they were therefore conscripted to be the body doubles for female stars. If you see an actress doing a stunt in an early film, odds are it's a man wearing her costume. That's not to say that women never did stunts. Actually, a lot of them did. Women have a long history of being circus performers, and with the invention of the airplane, new doors opened up for women to show off their skills. One of these women was Lillian Boyer. She was working as a waitress in 1921 when one day a couple of customers invited her to ride in an airplane, something that she had wanted to do for so long, so of course she took the offer. One airplane ride later, she climbed onto the wings of the plane and soon enough began training with Lieutenant Billy Brock and learned how to do aerial stunts and wing walking. She did over 352 aerial performances until 1928 when new government regulations passed, forcing aerial stunts like these to become a thing of the past. Unfortunately, sometimes wild animals got involved in stunts. Not surprising, considering the background in circus acts that many of these things had, but still. One particularly dangerous animal act involved training lions to sit in sidecars and be driven in circles around the Wall of Death, which is exactly what it looks and sounds like. Makes for some hilarious photos, but shocking nobody, this was not a fun time for the lions, and some of them managed to escape and maul bystanders to death, so let's not be involving wild large predators in carnival acts. please? Now, I'm sure when thinking of daredevils, proper-looking old lady Victorian school teachers is not what comes to mind first, but Annie Edson Taylor at the age of 63 in 1901 was indeed a daredevil and a school teacher. It was that year that she became the first person to survive going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, setting off over a century of barrel jokes. Annie was struggling financially, and seeing the success of stunt kings like the Barnum and Bailey circus acts, she thought that surviving an incredible stunt could fix her money woes. So she hopped in a barrel of her own design and went careening over the falls that had taken so many lives, and survived. She became an instant celebrity, nicknamed the Goddess of the Water. Unfortunately, the success was short-lived and the money was even shorter. She died in poverty in 1921, much like many other thrill-seekers of the era, possibly because, unlike other thrill-seekers, she never had any desire to replicate the stunt that made her famous. She told the Globe, "I would rather face a cannon than go over the falls again." Speaking of stunts that entered cartoon canon, and speaking of cannons, we've all seen some show or movie that shows a guy being shot out of a cannon. Maybe you've played the greatest game ever made, Zoo Race, in which the animals from Noah's Ark get shot out of cannons and go to the moon. Well, yes, dudes really did get shot out of cannons. The first being William Leonard Hunt, nicknamed the Great Farini in 1871. He invented a cannon he called the projector, made out of springs and rubber and a platform. A person would be shot out of it with gunpowder poofs for effect. Following him, the Australian Marvels Ella Zuila and George Loyal did an act in 1872 where George got launched out of a cylinder that looks like a cannon and would be caught by his partner who was hanging upside down on a trapeze. 6 years later, a 14-year-old named Rosa Matilda Richter, or Zazelle, redid the stunt in London and went on to join P.T. Barnum's circus. Moving on to more recent times, I don't know about you, but when I think of the word daredevil, the first thing that actually comes to mind is dudes doing long-distance motorcycle jumps. In particular, ones at the Grand Canyon or some other big crevice. Many have attempted wild stunts at the Grand Canyon, usually on the part that belongs to the Hualapai Nation, and in 1999, Robbie Nivell drove his motorcycle 228 feet through the air over the canyon. His father Abel was a famous moto jumper too. Look at him go. This is probably the guy that most people picture when they imagine motorcycle jumps. And then in 2008, of course, there's Robbie Madison, who did this highly publicized jump in Vegas. But possibly one of the most dangerous daredevil feats in history is this jump from the edge of space done in 2012 by skydiver Felix Baumgartner, which was played years later as an ad for the Super Bowl. Felix miraculously lived to tell the tale, but it only makes you wonder, what's next? It's easy to wonder why all these people wanted to do these risky things in the first place, especially in a time period when it was so much easier to die from lack of adequate medical care. And thrill-seeking behavior, of course, didn't start with human flies or cliff jumpers or even circus acts. You had the Roman gladiators, 13th century bull runners, 6th century Chinese hang gliders, and many, many more. People have always felt an urge to experience risky excitement, to push the boundaries of what is possible for the human body, to defy death. When speaking to an adrenaline junkie named Mike, psychologist Kenneth Carter was told, "I have no interest in dying skydiving. It's actually way safer than getting in your car and driving to work. What I have is a kind of addiction to life, for lack of a better word. I think it's not a disregard for life, but an addiction to life and trying to intensify moments instead of dull them out." People who do these wild stunts and thrill-seeking activities don't do it because they've got a death wish. They do it because they want to feel life at its most vivid, to touch the boundaries of experiencing the world. So you see, from the time of human flies garnering tens of thousands of onlookers, watching them scale buildings, to now, over a century later, when TV and the internet has brought ever more daring feats to the eyes of millions, people will always seek bigger and bigger thrills, and will always love watching them, a little fearful, and a little envious. Thank you for learning with me about the history of daredevils and their hunger for danger. Have you ever done any thrill-seeking activities, bungee jumping, skydiving? If so, why do you do it? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and wear thy parachute.